Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Said correctly, too. USA Prepares. We're delighted you're with us in class today. We broadcast 2 hours, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. through 11 a.m. Central Time. And Nathan is engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. I'm Vincent Finelli. And if you'd like to call us today, 866-582-9933, 866-582-9933. Rich Scheben's with us. Welcome, Rich Scheben.
Well, thank you, Mr. Finelli. How are you today?
Hey, I was just fine. I was just thinking about how it was a good thing, and they got it done in time. They redecorated the boardroom for the plunge protection team, and they replaced all those leather chairs with vinyl just in time for these guys to wet their pants yesterday. What do you think?
Absolutely. And, we could talk about this for a very long time, but if you're going to ask me what I think, you better give me about 4 hours of microphone here.
Well, that was the biggest. We're talking about stock markets crashing all over the world. And we're talking about, Tokyo's exchange. That market took a nosedive. The Nikkei dove down about 4.7%. Hong Kong, Sydney, Singapore each dropped about 3%. London dropped as well. And then, of course, the big board, the New York Stock Exchange, went down 11.75. And so what did we lose yesterday? About $4 trillion. $4 trillion was wiped off the map in terms of value. So, and of course, the cryptos didn't want to feel left out. They plunged as well. So this tells me that when people panic, they panic worldwide about finance. That's what that tells me. What are your thoughts about that, Rich?
All right, put your microphone down. Just take a nap. I'll take it from here.
Okay. I'm ready. I'm just going to relax.
Of course, I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek here, but,
yeah.
Think about where we're coming from. Let's call it yesterday. Interest rate cuts down to close to zero. The only people having access to the zero interest rates are basically the elite, the big corporations. Increased deficit spending, rising debt to GDP, increased monetization, basically digital button pressing, creating money, and everybody chasing assets and yields. And today, because of everything that's happened with the corruption and deception, and, everything that I'm talking about right now, they're talking about raising interest rates. They're talking about decelerating deficits as percentage of GDP. They're talking about unwinding QE, calling it QT, quantitative tightening, and a decrease of monetization. Of course, stocks are going to crash. But think about the things like fundamentals, profits, markets, leverage, loans, solvency, liquidity. Every definition that has anything to do with the market is totally out of whack. Nothing means anything anymore. Fair value, valuations in general, credit, debt, core businesses of corporations, free markets, supply and demand, velocity of money. Everything that we look at to measure equities or wealth is way out of whack for the purpose of inequality. And as I've mentioned many times in the past, a minimum of 85% of the people buy high and sell low. Basically, everything is a psyop. I'll be honest with you, there's no reason in the world why the stock market should be as high as they are. No reason. Because 1% of the people own 83% of the stocks. 10% of the people own 96% of the stocks. And don't forget the central banks, not just ours, but from around the world in hundreds of billions. For example, the Central Bank of Switzerland has been buying our equities. So I see people getting wealthier by the system that they're using the opportunity of the state and the central banks and not helping their customers and their people reap the benefit. And you look at wages going down. They say wages going up. It's basically for the top few percent. For the great bulk of the people, and I'd say probably 85% again of the people are not seeing higher wages. And they're definitely not seeing higher savings rates. Because wealth and prosperity does not come from the printing of money. Because 95% of the printing of money goes to the top 1 to 7%, depending on what you read. The people aren't getting those benefits. So when you see certain blue states, especially their cities, increasing minimum wage, basically that correlates to less full-time work available. Because especially the small and medium-sized businesses cannot compete with the lobbyists and all the benefits that the big corporate oligarchies get. So you see more people getting laid off. So it's really a negative benefit to workers in the overall economy. The unemployment numbers are so skewed, they don't even talk about the people who are out of the workforce. And as robotics and automation, artificial intelligence gets more sophisticated with more innovations, there'll be more and more people squeezed out of the workforce. Tax cuts, is this going to help the little guy? Very little. I just don't see life-changing money for the little guy. I see the stock buybacks, the dividends, the stock options in the form of executive under-the-table pay, if you will, for the CEOs and CFOs. I see, more mergers and acquisitions. I see more corporations issuing debt. Now, keep in mind, the number of companies listed in the U.S. stock market has been cut over half in the past 20 years, from about approximately 8,000 to 4,000. And that tells me not only has companies been going out of business, but it also tells me that the fascist system is unstoppable, because the mergers and acquisitions from the big companies who are giving themselves free money with 0% interest rates are enveloping more of these companies and getting bigger. And at the same time, what happens is the small and medium-sized businesses can no longer compete against them. And I see a money velocity not increasing like they say. From what I'm reading, it's actually decreasing, especially when you look at it from a two-economy perspective. We have one economy for the super wealthy, especially that's the top 7%. And then when we have one economy for everybody else, the bottom 93%. So when the money velocity is only increasing and the wages are only increasing for the select few at the very top, which have been winners picked and losers picked by the system, it's when there's so much inequality that the super wealthy have so much money and they're actually skewing the data. People say, well, we have inflation because the price of crude's going up. I really, from what I'm reading, I see supply and demand that's for the bottom 93% going down because they're getting poorer and poorer. They're broke. I see OPEC having less influence. And I see our fracking technology, along with natural gas as well as oil, increasing its sophistication. And that's going to probably bring oil prices down eventually to like $30, $40 a barrel after it's all said and done, after Saudi Arabia sells this big company that they're trying to unload, mostly on the American people and pension funds. So we're in, when you start seeing and reading things with the words bubbles, artificial, I just don't see how the stock market under these circumstances is going to increase. I see disposable personal income barely up, savings rate 10-year low, debt's an all-time high, credit's collapsing. I've talked about the yield curve scenario several times. And as the basis points go up or rates go up with QT, that's going to mean less borrowing. Less borrowing is going to mean more of the collapse and inversion of the yield curve. So you dovetail that with demographics, where the oldest group of people in the Western world, especially the U.S., is the old people that's growing. Actually, the whole country is decreasing in growth and population, except for most of Africa and one or two countries in the Middle East. So it goes back to good old-fashioned, what's interest rates going to do? Sounds like they're going to raise them, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 times, which could crash everything. But again, as I've also mentioned, interest rates are a function of wages, economic growth, and inflation. Now, people say we have inflation. It's more of a stagflationary consequence for the bottom 93%. So, the things like food, water, housing, stocks, rent, healthcare, college, insurance, taxes, lumber, and there's a handful of things that are going up dramatically. But it's a lot because of subsidies, money printing, special interest, lobbying, and tax. Has nothing to do with free markets or supply and demand in a lot of cases. Vince?
No disagreement from me. I've got a couple comments when we come back. My thoughts on what you just said. And if you'd like to go to Rich Scheben's website, offgridmontana.com. Offgridmontana.com. We'll be right back. Rich Scheben's with us. Rich, you mentioned a lot of things, and I have a couple of comments. There's an old saying when I went to school back in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and that was, if you build a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your door. And what that meant was, if you could come up with an ingenious, better way of doing things, people would be very interested in what you had to offer. So if it were a product that were better than the other guy's product, customers would tend to gravitate toward your product. Well, right now, companies are manufacturing, they're interested in manufacturing products that have really insignificant features. Like, we've got a curved screen instead of a flat screen. Is that really all that much better? We've got a curved television screen, a curved smartphone screen. We've got rounded corners. Really? We've got curved refrigerator doors and handles. We've got more electronic soft buttons, touchscreen type buttons. People think this is just great. But what they're not seeing is the lack of quality behind those buttons and curved screens. They're not seeing the durability being removed from those products. We're not building products with better insulation, lower energy loss, better compressors, better bearings, better pulleys, belts, gears, chains, better transmissions. We're not doing that. We're building products that appear to be innovative. And the generally dumb public, the GDP, seems to be buying that stuff. That's what they seem to be interested in. The new phone comes out and people are lined up around the block to get a new phone. Really? Can you talk to somebody better on your new phone? I know you can do things like check the market and check the weather and get alerts and all that, but you could do that on your old phone, couldn't you? What I'm saying is there is this illusion that we need to buy because it's new. And if you think about it, when we first had DOS-based computers, disk operating system computers, the hard drives lasted a really long time. They really did. Then we got Windows, which was a graphical interface, then the hard drive started failing. Well, not only that, we had to get a faster processor because the old DOS-based computer with the Intel or the American Micro Devices or Cyrix processors weren't fast enough. to satisfy the bloated operating systems. So we needed to upgrade our computers. Then the new operating system version came out, and we needed not only to upgrade our computer, we needed a new computer. And we just kept buying. And really, the old computers would be fine if they weren't bloated. Now we need fast computers just to handle this onslaught of advertising. You go to a website, and you get videos, sound. I mean, you get so many bits coming your way. Well, now you need a faster internet connection. It's out of control. It really is. So the idea of building a better mousetrap and having customers beat a path to your door isn't true very much anymore. Because who do you know that's buying a washing machine? Who do you know that says, tell you what, I'm interested, but can you turn this thing upside down? I want to look underneath. I want to see the transmission. I want to see the drive mechanism. I want to see where you put the computer controls. So I want to make sure that it's out of the way of being splashed by the detergent and maybe bleach if we happen to use that. I want to make sure this thing's going to last. Who does that? You know, they used to have in stores, they would have a cutaway of the front cabinet, and it would be replaced with plexiglass. So you could say, well, let me bend over. Wow, okay, that's the motor. Well, that one, I think that's bigger than the other one. Wow, that drive belt's a little bigger than the other one. The transmission looks a little more substantial. I think I'll get the one that's better built. You can't do that anymore because they don't show you what's on the inside. Then you have to read reviews on the internet, which a lot of those are bogus. They're written by the companies trying to sell their own products. No kidding. I interviewed a guy for a job, and he was a jacket writer. I'll tell you what a jacket writer is when we come back. A jacket writer. Remember that term. Got an email from Robert in Kansas. And Robert in Kansas indicated that he likes it when I rant. Well, Robert, this is for you. Okay, there we go. So, jacket writer. I mentioned the term jacket writer. So, a jacket writer is a person who writes the back cover information on a book. So back in the 1980s, now I'm paraphrasing, I mentioned this story just once before on the air, but during the 1980s, I was interviewing this guy for a position to report to me in the corporation where I was, and this guy sent in his resume, and I was looking at the resume, and I was interviewing him in person. And I said, so, you're a jacket writer. What's a jacket writer? And he said, well, that's a person who writes the information on the, cover of the book, or so you can get a little bit about information about what the book's about and, buy the book. And I said, wow. So you must read a lot of books. He said, no, not really. And he said, well, and I'm paraphrasing. No, I didn't have to read the books to write the jacket. That, you really don't have to do that. You can write a jacket without reading the book. It kind of floored me. So I was looking at his resume a little further. I'm thinking, how can you do that? How can you, write information that is going to lead a buyer to buy this book without having read the book? Kind of sounds, like it's unscrupulous. It sounds like a little bit of fraud to me. Actually, it sounds like a lot of fraud. Okay, so I'm looking at his resume, and I said, so before you were a jacket writer, you were a hydroceramic technician? Well, that's a new term to me. What's a hydroceramic technician? And he kind of blushed a little bit. And he said, well, I worked at this restaurant in the back there, in the kitchen, and I was the dishwasher. So this guy is a hydroceramic technician, which is just a euphemism for dishwasher. So this guy's, pretty darn creative, at least with the written word. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because you've heard the term, sell the sizzle, not the steak. All right? So image, appearance, that's what's being consumed today. Image and appearance rather than the steak. Okay? Let me give you another term. For those of you who like wine, How many of you just raise your hands? I'll just look out and see how many people agree with this. So when you're tasting a wine, if you go to a wine tasting, what do they serve with wine? Like 100% of the time. Cheese, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cheese. So you go to a wine and cheese party or a wine tasting and they have cheese. And isn't that nice? I mean, they give you a little bit of cheese to sample with your wine. Well, here's the industry inside information about that. You buy wine on apples. You sell wine on cheese. Let me say it again. You buy wine on apples and you sell wine on cheese. It's really hard to cover up a bad wine if you have a bite of an apple first. You can't do it. So if you want to know if a wine is good or bad to the palate, have a bite of an apple first. But if you have cheese first, even a pretty bad wine tastes good. That's the lengths at which we are going to deceive, hoodwink, con, and mislead customers. It's as simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard that before, Rich? Buy wine on apples and sell on cheese?
I have a story that's very synonymous with that in the context that you're trying to. I went to a wine tasting tour. Oh, what's that big valley in California that is known for its wine? But you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I'm going to paraphrase and make a very long story short. I was the only one during the tour who had the guts to ask such a blunt question. And I go, how come this bottle of wine is $2,000 and this one is $7,000? And the wine master who was giving the tour basically said, well, we have this big end of year party, end of fiscal year party, and we have all these people come in from wine masters to ordinary public, and then everybody votes at the end of the party which wine should be the expensive, which one should be the cheap one. And I go, well, at the end of the party, isn't everybody's palates a little compromised and not really cleansed? Not really, because half the people have probably got a buzz. And he started laughing. He goes, yep. So there is a lot of deception out there. And if I may, Vince, I would like to go back to what our original topic at hand was before we go to
just one quick question. Just one quick question.
You bet.
Was there an apple anywhere in sight at this wine tasting?
I've seen apples at wine tasting, yes.
Only for professionals, right?
I don't know. I remember seeing it out there on the tables. I didn't really put two and two together with what you're saying, but it definitely does make sense.
It does. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Corruption, manipulation, deception, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so back to the topic at hand.
Okay, since we started talking about the stock market and my personal feelings, I'm reading some of the latest news. Breaking, Secretary Munchin says the Treasury is monitoring the stock market. You know, the Treasury that gives IOUs to the Federal Reserve. Mm-hmm. U.S. job openings fall to 7-month low. Job openings, not unemployment. U.S. job openings fall to 7-month low at the end of 2017. You know, Trump's doing a lot of great stuff. He is not a miracle. I remember reading quite a few articles during the Obama administration where the deficit was set to soar for the next administration who comes in. And this is the situation that we're in here in America. We've lowered the bars of standards for getting a job and keeping a job, otherwise known as group identity politics, and the demographic situation, corrupt monetary policies from the central banks, and Keynesian economics. I've talked about all of these many, many times. But you mentioned earlier about the big companies. Now, see, a lot of the things, what you talked about earlier, Vince, is what used to happen in the land of supply and demand and free markets and people working hard and people wanting to be successful and all this. Well, now we have monopolies who don't care about antitrust laws. I mean, you just look at the last year. Who's been holding up the stock market, especially the NASDAQ? Basically, 8 tech companies were responsible for 60 to 80% of the gains. And, you know, you have all these monopolies like Big Pharma, Google, Alphabet, Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon. You know, some don't even care about profits. You know, a great example is Netflix. Netflix is out there because, as I always mention, MO of the elite is to distract, dumb down, and divide the American people by groups. So when you distract them with entertainment like Netflix, who cares if they make money or not? Because it's doing their job regarding the distractions. And then when you look at the banks, I mean, if the elite really wanted to help the people, they would reinstate Glass-Steagall. Look how many banks over the years have been caught embezzling, stealing, fraud, manipulating precious metals. The LIBOR scandal stole $8 trillion from the people over 6 years. And these people want to go digital currency? What could possibly go wrong if it's centralized from the top down? Of course, that was a little sarcasm there. But, I mentioned earlier about the rates, the bond bubble, the interest rates. If they raise interest rates just to collapse everything, it's not just going to be the bond market that collapses. It's going to be stocks, housing, and that's where the bulk of the money is for the bottom 93%, or at least the top portion of that, what used to be the middle class. So real estate, especially commercial and retail, will head into the crapper. Emerging markets around the world that uses a lot of the dollar will go down. Anybody that doesn't have a fixed rate on their loan is going to go down. And the interest in our debt will be unpayable. With a $20 trillion debt, if we went up to 5%, that's $1 trillion in interest payments, which is over one-third of the Fed spending. So we're heading towards very interesting times, and I don't believe, and this is why I mention whenever we talk about bonds and interest rate, I always make sure I reiterate the fact that interest rates are a function of growth, wages, and inflation. Now, wages is only increasing for the very few. Growth is not really increasing, and every book is cooked, so be careful how you measure growth, and inflation has been exported to low-cost producing countries. I mean, it's even hard to make a living in this country. I mean, how do you make a living when you see people who can't even afford American labor because someone's suing because someone said a joke in the hallway or complimented somebody, and all of a sudden human resources and attorneys come out of the woodwork? We have the socialism that has totally destroyed commerce in America. I don't care what the media labels them as snowflakes, cupcakes, safe spaces, crying rooms, microaggressions. You get upset from whatever, and you're excused from exams. There's commerce in America is not going to get better for the bottom 93% unless we have rapid growth. And this is one of the reasons why I talk about that idea that I mention, fairly often about fixing the economy. It's QE for the people. And Vince, I wouldn't mind going over that again if you would allow me after the break.
Sure. Sounds good to me. I just wanted to mention that General Electric is likely to be dropped from the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Can you imagine that? They were there from the beginning.
They do. When something doesn't look good, they replace them.
We'll be right back.
It's all fake.
Rich Stevens with us, offgridmontana.com, offgrid, MONTANA.com. Rich, please continue.
Sure. America, what I'm trying to do, and I know a lot of people from Europe and stuff listen to because I get a lot of your emails. What we need to do is not just read research and share information, but we need to give outside-the-box ideas, because how many times have you been hearing people say this and people say that, and they never do it? The whole system is bought and paid for. Even official authorities are bought and paid for. Look at the Department of Justice. Look at the FBI. The stories about the CIA, the NSA, all the intelligence agencies. People aren't even working for America anymore. And this is why the powers that be with their NGOs want to basically eliminate dedication to your country, because they want to control the world. It's an addiction to power, money, and control. So one of the things I suggest, and I've suggested this a few times over the air, basically what this is QE, quantitative easing for the people. Because as I've mentioned, even today, 95% of the QE goes to the top 1 to 7%. And a lot of these people hoard that money. They don't, and when you look at what corporations are doing today, as I've mentioned many times, they're not reinvesting into the people, into products, into service, into quality, and new innovations, and R&D. They're basically investing it into creative accounting, which I've discussed many times. So if people can get behind, I don't care about the credit. I don't care about the recognition at all. Most people do things for things like that, and money and power and fame, and they have this urge to be liked because they're so insecure. Why don't we just do something for the benefit of the people so we can educate the people so they can make better choices? So here's my idea of, and I've mentioned this a few times, I'd like to see every company, and first of all, for those people in your life that says that'll never happen, that'll never change, okay, those are the people who are poster boys and girls for ignorance, apathy, and indifference. We have to go beyond that and strive for something better for the people, for the masses. So, that being said, I'd like to see a breakup of all big companies. The word oligarchy and monopoly be non-existent. No more lobbying, special interests, and PACs. And I would love to see, and the elites are cringing right now, I would love to see the people, because you never see this so-called poll, do you, folks? And that is, how often do you see how much net worth an individual or corporation should have? Have you ever seen that on anything that's credible? Of course not. It's because the elite controls the system. I would like to see a poll, a vote on how much net worth a corporation or individual should have. When people over history have funded both sides of wars, NGOs, geoengineering, mercenaries, taking over countries, taking over currencies, who does it? Is it the bottom 93%, or is it the very super wealthy at the very top who have this addiction to power, money, and control? I think you can answer that for yourself. So going with more specificity, what I'd like to do is create negative interest rates. Banks still have a huge spread on cars, credit cards, loans, and they've been bailed out by the people. I think I remember reading an article, I said this on air, that the Wall Street, the few people on Wall Street, just their bonuses was 3 times the amount, 3 times, than all the minimum wage workers in America combined. We have bailed out the too big to fails and the too big to jails on the backs of the bottom 93%. So if we had negative interest rates, and then we had means testing, and I'll do the second half, Vince, on the other side of the break, I think this is a really good idea. Unfortunately, the elites don't want accountability, and they'll probably never get behind it. But if enough people did, who knows where we might go. Vince?
Okay. Rich Sheben's with us, and when we come back, we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about the more than 650 car crashes on the icy Missouri roads on Sunday. I was out there, and it was an outrage what the Department of Transportation has done with these cheese graters. Everyone all set, cocked, locked. Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Rich Sheben's with us, offgridmontana.com, offgridmontana.com. Rich, you had some more comments.
I do. Thank you, Vince. And I think means testing would be a really good idea. And I mean at both ends, meaning that if we have negative interest rates, let's say the people decide that if you have under $1 million or $500,000 net worth, you don't get dinged with the fees of negative interest rates to keep it in the bank. But if you have over that amount, then you do. What we need to do is give the bottom 93% of people a shot. Okay? I would like to see also 100-year mortgages, or at least much higher than 30, to give people an opportunity when they have good years, they can put money into principal and give themselves a buffer, versus when they have lean years, they have more time to pay that loan back and obviously have more fixed loans. And I would love to see us get rid of any loan that's not fixed, okay? I would also like to see the mean household debt for America identified, and that amount given to the people in QE, quantitative easing, instead of 95% of that money going to the top 1 to 7%, each household gets that voucher, and a voucher would help prevent hyperinflation versus just getting a check. And I think if you're in debt, you have to pay that off, which means that you probably don't even get that voucher. You just show the debt you have, and this particular plan pays off your debt. And if you are out of debt, then you've got to go buy a car or something with it to move the economy and have it churn. And then, of course, dismantle our central banks and eliminate debt-based currency. Now, folks, I am all for free markets. I would love to see this John Galt society that we could live in, but we've literally eliminated hard work, effort, proven results, and qualifications for the people because of political correctness, group identity politics, Keynesian economics, which is basically elite interventionism, what the central banks have done, and the demographic situation we're heading into. So we've replaced hard work, effort, proven results, and qualifications with corruption, manipulation, deception, nepotism. These are all taken over. And it's almost impossible for one to control their own destiny. If at this point, if you think that ideology plays that big of a role, and you think the left-right paradigm is that influential, you're wrong. It's mostly theater. It's mostly an act. I mean, I can prove it with 10 different shows, 2 hours long. I mean, just look at the State of the Union speech. When those poor people, the victims, the black couples who their daughter died, got killed by MS-13, the Dems were on their smartphones playing games and not even listening, didn't stand, didn't applaud, didn't pay attention, nothing. And guess what? The Democrat celebrities called them. They were props. They were props. That's right. I saw them do this on Twitter. Okay? This is unacceptable. This is an insult. It's degrading. And it's totally disrespectful. And as long as we're going to have these type of behaviors where it's them versus us, it's always going to be the aristocracy versus the serfs. I promise you. It's all creative accounting. It's theater. It's drama. Every talking point, meme, theme, and narrative is sanctioned. Remember last week I used that, or just on Friday events, I used that word sanctioned. Everything gets sanctioned of what certain people, even on the right, up high, who get a lot of people listening. They are told what not to say, or at least certain degrees of half-truths. We have to do something for the people, because the people do not have any options. And I think if we would stop infighting and chaos, which is the plan by the elite, if we could stop letting them distract, dumb down, and divide us by race, gender, sex, sexual orientation, religion, ideology, generation. You know, again, their job is to manufacture perception, pity, guilt, and ideology. We cannot allow 5 companies, just a few hundred executives, to sway public opinion like this. We have to wake up. We have to be aware of the divide and conquer strategy that they're doing, because the consequences of a divide and conquer strategy is lowering the bars of standards and expectations, which eliminates your ability to control your own destiny. It's meant to make you submissive. It's meant to break your will. It's meant so they can hijack these American words and make them politically correct buzzwords by literally changing the definition and using them as a weaponized tool, like democracy. How many times have you heard the people say who are pro-globalist, pro-socialism, anything socialism, tyranny, totalitarianism, communism, dictatorships, these are all top-down centralized control where the people can't control their own destiny. And when you reward mediocrity for decade after decade after decade, you turn the whole country into the law of diminishing returns, especially for the bottom 93%. Because all the ingenuity, the productivity, the knowledge, the innovations, the access, the opportunities are only going to be for the elite few. And that's what we've turned into. Vince, thank you for letting me rant, by the way.
You mentioned mediocrity. So yesterday I was installing some doors, converting a room on the first floor of our farmhouse to my new studio, the dining room. You've been there, Rich, and I like that room. It's got lots of glass, and I can look out, and lots of sunshine, and so I want to convert that room. And I put in French doors in one side, and I put in glass door on the other side. So I was working on that, and I was trying to fit these doors and get them to close absolutely properly. And I've got them within 1/32 of an inch. I mean, I want them perfect. And I'm looking at how the door closes against the doorstop, and smoke is coming out of my ears. And I want to know who the jerk is that they hired to put the doorstop against the door, because it waves. It's not straight. So I want to take a picture of it and send it to the manufacturer and say, here's the label. Here's the shift that built this. You need to fire this guy because he's not paying attention. So I have to take the doorstop off a factory assembled door, take the doorstop off the casing and straighten it out. I shouldn't have to do that. Americans should be paying more attention. We used to be the best. So when you talk about mediocrity, I think they said, all right, who's got a pulse? All right, you're hired. I think that's what they're doing. Now, I'd like to digress for just a second on another rant. And during the first Great Depression in the United States, caused by the bankers, farmers were losing their farms. And what would happen is the banks that held the notes on these farms would sell these properties at auction. And the neighbors to the farm being sold at auction would show up. And they would withhold their bid. And ultimately, when we're talking just a few pennies on the dollar for this farm, they would bid. And they would get this farm and the machinery and the equipment and all of it for very few dollars. Very few. I mean, fire sale prices. And then they would give the farm back to the guy who just lost the farm. So the neighbors would get together quietly and en masse gang up on the banksters. What a great idea. Okay, let's fast forward to today. Farms are being sold because farmers are losing their farms. They can't. It's darn near impossible to be a farmer today. The cost of equipment is out of control. So what happens is these farms are being sold at auction. The equipment's being sold at auction. And the new trend is the surviving farmers are going to these auctions and they're buying the equipment at fire sale prices and keeping it. So instead of helping their neighbors survive, it's not like that anymore. Now it's me first. If I can get a trailer cheap, if I can get a tractor cheap, if I can get a hay mower cheap, if I can get a rake cheap, a baler cheap, a plow cheap, if I can buy tools cheap, if I can buy the farm cheap, I'm going to do it. That's what people are doing. They're not helping to keep their village intact. It's me first. That's what's happening right now. It's disgraceful. It's disgraceful. Now, you mentioned 100-year mortgage notes. Okay, I want to share something that is useful to our class. Class, have you ever heard the term half-time, H-A-L-F space T-I-M-E? Relates to paying your mortgage note. Now, if you have a 30-year, I'm just going to give you an example. If you have a 30-year mortgage note, it doesn't have to be 30, it can be 25, it can be 15. But during the early days of the mortgage payments, it's mostly interest and a very small portion of the payment. If you print out an amortization schedule, you'll see that it's mostly interest and a very small percentage of that payment is for the principal. Now, a couple things you can do. You can tell your bank, tell you what, I'm all excited about this new 30-year mortgage. And monthly payments, 360 payments for 30 years, one payment per month. Tell you what I'd like to do. I don't want to pay you once a month. I want to pay you twice a month. So if the mortgage payment, I'm going to give you an example. Let's say it's $500 a month. See, I'll tell you what, I'll pay you on the first $250, half of it, and I'll pay you the second half on the 15th. And I want the interest to be computed as I'm paying it. You will drive down that 30-year mortgage to 19 years. No kidding. No kidding. That's halftime. I'll say a little bit more about that when we come back. So, class, I mentioned the halftime principle for paying your mortgage quickly. What you do is you simply tell your bank that you're going to pay twice a month instead of once a month. And if your mortgage payment is $500, for example, per month, you split that into two payments of $250. So you're paying them exactly the same amount, but you're paying it twice as often. And by doing that, you will reduce your 30-year mortgage note to about 19 years. Okay? It works. Next thing is, in the early days of your mortgage note, most of the payment is interest. A small portion is principal. So you pay your first mortgage payment, and you pay the principal of your second mortgage payment. Now you've knocked off two mortgage payments very, very quickly. Or you pay your first one, your second one, your third one, your fourth one, your fifth one, or more, because it's not too painful in the early days of your mortgage note. And you pay off as many of the mortgage payment principals as you can with each payment. Now, does that work? Yeah, it does. Mrs. Finelli and I, we bought our first house together in the 1970s. We were able to drive down our 30-year mortgage to 10 years. Now, what does that mean? That means that, you say, well, you want to go out to eat? Or would you rather lop off a month of our mortgage note? Pick one. Well, that's easy. For me and Mrs. Finelli, we would knock off those mortgage payments. And when Mrs. Finelli and I first got married in the 70s, I said, hey, would you like an engagement ring, or would you rather have another room on a house? Pick one. She said, that's easy. So we bought a 4-bedroom, 2-story colonial, all brick, first house. We scrimped, we saved before we bought it. We had some goals before we got married. We had to have our own cars, had to have viable, good jobs, and we had to have $10,000 in the bank each. And we lived at home until, each of us lived at home until we got married. So when we came out of the gate, we weren't behind the 8 ball. We bought a house. It was a fixer-upper, and we fixed it up. And when we sold it 10 years later, we sold it to a vice president of J.P. Morgan. It was good enough for him. What I'm saying is, we bought the biggest, best house we could that nobody wanted because it needed some work. We did the work, and then it was good enough for a VP of J.P. Morgan. And we made money on the house. So you don't have to do what everybody else does. You don't have to follow the herd. You don't have to be part of that herd mentality. Rich Scheben, any comments?
Yeah, I got a few. First of all, 30-year mortgage rate, the first 7 to 8 years is about 98% interest. Now, the amortization schedules are starting to be tweaked because people are waking up to this. And this is in the book, I studied my amortization schedule for a very long time, and I just made certain payments towards principal. I made sure I had some type of affidavit to make sure it went into principal, not principal and interest. And I paid off my loan in a very short time, my first bank. But when I talk about 100-year mortgage rates, because, this program is basically about thinking outside the box and trying to help the little people, because the little guy has no representation. We have no protection under the law. We have no rights. We have no restitution. And if you've listened to me over the years, I've given multiple examples of that. But if we had a 100-year mortgage, let's say I'm just shooting from the hip here, let's say a bank or a lender made the first 22 years 98% interest, basically synonymous to a 30-year mortgage being the first 7 to 8 years being 98% interest. So I just chose 22 years, but let's say someone paid off, because the first 22 years, if it's 98% interest, you don't need a lot of money to get to the principal, a good principal chunk. So let's say you paid up to 25 years because you paid a little principal. What we should have is that buys the homeowner 3 years of forgiveness in lieu of losing everything during lean times. And this would make community success, and maybe even tweak the contract where the owner-seller holds part of the paper along with the bank and the lender. There's a lot of great ideas we can do to help the little guy. Unfortunately, the greedy don't want these ideas to get out. Vince?
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. Rich Sheben's with us, offgridmontana.com, offgridmontana.com. Rich, you mentioned the 100-year mortgage note, and that's what prompted me to talk about that story about the First Great Depression, and then the second story about how to pay off your mortgage very quickly. So the idea, class, Rich Scheben and I are saying the same thing, but slightly differently. What we're saying is, if the plan has got to be that if you fall on hard times, and you can very easily, through no fault of your own, your boss could have a lousy day and say, that's it, we're going to close the company down. That's it. I've had it. Or he could have a bad day at the golf course, or he could just change his mind. Or his wife could say, or his girlfriend could say, hey, you don't spend enough time with me. Why don't you shut down that company and let's go fly around the world or buy a yacht? So that could happen. You could lose your job, and you might need some breathing room, some time to get back on your feet. And if the mortgage were flexible enough, you could do that. But if you're depending on the banker, that nice guy that you see at the coffee shop, or when you walk into the bank, if he's ever there, that nice guy that appears to be your friend, just try not paying your mortgage note for 6 months and see how friendly that guy is. One other thing I'd like to share. I posted on the website, USA Prepares, an article about, and it's from weather.com. More than 650 crashes kill at least 5 people on icy Missouri roads. 650 crashes on Sunday. Now, they had a video. They pulled the video off. Why? It is devastating to the criminal corporation called the state of Missouri. Department of Transportation put up these narrow aisles on the highways. They keep you going straight ahead. There was no place for people to go with their vehicles. One guy may spin out. The next guy tries to avoid it. Pretty soon you've got five cars, trucks sliding into each other. Pretty soon you've got between 50 and 100. Literally. State police reported up to 100 vehicles in just one of these multiple crashes on Sunday. Well, there were cars literally flipped up on top of tractor trailers. This was horrific beyond belief. And if you go to the website, usaprepares.com, you'll see the link. And if you click on it, you'll see, an image of this horrific crash. But what you won't see is the video that goes for miles of smashed vehicles, mangled vehicles, hurt people. You'll see it, but they took the video down. And what do you get instead? Error. No valid source could be found for the video. It was there. They took it down. It's devastating to the criminal enterprise called the State of Missouri Corporation. Now, the people in the Department of Transportation, and Robert in Kansas he likes it when I rant. So here, this is for you, Robert. The Department of Transportation and the minions involved should be arrested, tried, and convicted of intentionally causing manslaughter on the highways and byways in Missouri with these cheese graters. No place to go. We've got a great median. We do. There's places for you to go. If the guy in front of you has some condition that you need to get away from, it'd be nice to be able to go to the left or the right and get onto some grass and, take a bumpy ride, but your vehicle would survive, you'd survive, nobody would die. Nah, they fixed it so you've got no place to go. I just wanted to mention that very briefly. Robert in Kansas, welcome.
Oh, hey, Vincent and Rich Scheben, how are y'all?
Very
good,
well.
Thank you. Yourself?
Oh, I'm pretty good. I really enjoyed the show today. Again, great rants, too. The rants are where it's all at, I tell you what. I was listening earlier, Rich, and you were talking about velocity of money and the minimum wage. And this might sound like an uninformed question to you and to Vincent, but what I'm wondering, why don't we just raise the minimum wage? What's the problem with that?
The studies are showing that when you raise the minimum wage, full-time workers are decreasing at a much faster pace. And in a situation where we have so much consumption and not putting money into consumer advancement and commerce advancement and corporate advancement into R&D into the employees. We have consumer debt growing much faster than GDP growth. And when debt is climbing much faster than wages, which it is, it's very hard to increase minimum wage when companies are decreasing at the amount they are because they're enveloping each other. Mergers and acquisitions is what's happening in a great amount today. Remember what I said earlier in the show? A lot of the companies, we went from 4,000 to 8,000 New York Stock Exchange to 4,000. That basically shows that a lot of companies are going out of business and other companies are buying each other out. And that's what the mergers and acquisitions and stock buybacks and dividend payouts and basically feathering the nest of the CEOs and CFOs through stock options is what's happening. Instead of increasing productivity,
the minimum wage. Yes.
Yeah, so when you increase the minimum wage in this particular situation with consumer debt growing faster than GDP, debt climbing faster than wages, a demographic nightmare, a Keynesian economics, which is totally blown out of the water, anything goes. We can't, if you raise minimum wage, it's only going to affect the very few. And it's going to be more of an incentive for the elite to innovate with the new industry that's coming with robotics, automation, and artificial intelligence. This is an incentive to get rid of the people, and that's what's happening. With all this, with the corruption and manipulation that's been happening behind the scenes, and central banks printing money, monetizing debt, basically the elite are feathering their own nest at all the levels that I mentioned just recently and today and over the weeks. So it's making it very difficult for minimum wage for the bounties to get to the masses. It's only getting to very few, and it's not going to last very long regarding attrition because of robotics, automation, and artificial intelligence. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And so if the robots and the AI do come in and they essentially create the value for us, are we looking at something like a UBI, universal basic income?
Well, they've been talking about this for a long time, and they're doing that. You know why they're talking about it? It's because we've given the elite universal basic income for decades by the printing of money, because everything I just mentioned and much more that I've mentioned over the weeks has basically feathered the elite. The inequality has gone through the roof between the aristocracy and the serfs. And this is why I say don't always hang your hat on ideology and the left-right paradigm. That's a very small portion of it. You got to look at the actions. You got to look at the consequences. You got to follow the money. And this is why the powers that be are trying very hard to sway public opinion and control the narratives at every standpoint. They're not. It's manufacturing perception, pity, guilt, ideology. This is. We need to stand for principle because they're using professional wordsmith, media propaganda, subliminal messaging in every movie, Hegelian dialectic, you name it. They're doing everything to distract, dumb down, and divide us by groups so we don't see what's happening. But when you look at the numbers, the inequality of what the elites have, the aristocracy versus the rest of us, it's unacceptable. It's off the charts.
Robert, I have an answer for you from my perspective.
Okay.
Whenever I had a job interview, starting with my very, very, very first job interview at the high school level, you know, the interviewer would tend to ask me, so how much would you like in terms of compensation or salary? And I would always turn that around to the person interviewing me. And I would say, well, I'd like to leave that up to you. Why don't you pick that number based on what you think I'm worth to the organization, and that would be fine with me. And the reason I would do, and I'll tell you why I did it that way. Because let's say I picked a number that was higher than his number. And let's say he said, well, that's more than I wanted, but okay. And let's say I didn't live up to his expectations. I'd get fired, okay? Because I was too expensive. So my plan was I didn't want to be paid more than other people who could do what I was doing, because I would stand out as the first guy to get the axe. It ended up that I usually was paid more than the other guys. Because after I was there for a while, they saw I worked harder than the other guys. And they saw I was worth more.
Value. Yes.
Yeah, I produced more value. So they would increase my compensation. Because they thought, hey, this guy, we ought to keep him. We don't want him to leave. So instead of me worrying about being fired, they were worried about me leaving. Okay? So if you deliver, and if you shine, and if you stand out, they probably will want to keep you. So that's one thought. Now, here's the other thought. So in one of these positions that I had, the masses, the people who answered the telephones, who sat at the computer screens and talked to customers, they like to take Fridays off. Well, the boss asked me to fix that problem with computers. So I built a system with assistance of others, but I was the lead guy in my department to build a system to automate answering the telephone. And that's that press 1, press 2, press 3 that you all hate. I hate it too. But the answer was, what do we do with people who don't show up for work? Well, we replace them with computers. What do you do if you have California saying the minimum wage is going to be $15 and you're running a McDonald's franchise and you go, geez, we can't afford that. So what do? You say, hey, can we have a touch screen to replace these people that the state just said we have to pay $15 an hour to? We can't afford that. How about a computer? Can we replace them? The answer is sure. So what happens, Robert, is people who are asking for minimum wage increases can eliminate their own jobs. We'll be right back. Robert in Kansas had some questions about minimum wage, and I've got a couple more comments. And then Robert will have to go. We've got Ron in Seattle on hold. So I'm not suggesting that we underpay people at the minimum wage level. I absolutely believe that we should compensate people according to the value that they bring to the companies. Okay? Because if we overpay everybody, the companies go under. If we underpay people, it's not fair. So there has to be a balance. And just to put an exclamation point on what I have been saying and what Rich has been saying, numerous corporations have just announced over the last couple of weeks that they are going to give $1,000 bonuses to employees. Everybody thinks, wow, that's great. $1,000 extra. Boy, I wasn't expecting it. Wonderful. Then there's a comma. Then there's a but. And we're going to lay off thousands of others. So the guys get to stay, get a $1,000 bonus. The guys that are paying for the bonus get fired. That's the way it works. That's the way it really is. So, Robert, can you call me this evening or tomorrow evening and at home? And I'd love to chat with you and see if we can get you on Friday. Would that be okay?
Sure thing, Vincent. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Robert in Kansas. Ron in Seattle, Washington. Thank you for calling.
Yeah, short and sweet. The minimum wage concept is a exercise in futility in my mind, because in a free market like we have worldwide at this point, if you do a increase in wages, you're just sending jobs offshore, typically, except in the service industry possibly, which will probably be replaced by robots. What you need is tariffs and duty. After the 16th Amendment is eliminated, you've only got left the 8th Amendment.
And that's what El Jefe, the president, did with solar panels. We now have a 30% tariff on solar panels coming into this country to kind of level the playing field a little bit. Now,
he actually tried a 35% across the board import tariff, because the 16th Amendment, in my mind, is about to go. As a result, that'll leave you with the 8th Amendment. Then after that, anyway, I won't get into tactics, but as far as the concept, the only way to resolve the problem, in my mind, is tariffs and duties, in spite of the fact that you'll be losing a lot of export jobs, because it'll start a mini trade war. But China requires us in the game, and the only way to accomplish that is by negotiation.
I have a hard copy of exactly what you are saying in our barn. It's white. It's a 1979 vintage. It's a model 928. It's badged with the Porsche badge on it, and it used to belong to H. Ross Perot. And that's exactly what he said. There will be a giant sucking sound going to Mexico, And it has. And our jobs are evaporating in this country. And pretty soon, we won't have very many people who know how to do the things that need to be done for us to survive. And I believe, Ron, in Seattle, Washington, you are absolutely right. Rich, your thoughts?
That is the intent.
Well, thank you, Ron. Well, when you look at really the jobs that's happening that's on an increase, it really is leisure, hospitality, and service jobs. Now, there are other industries that are increasing, but think about the debt and credit cycle, which debt and credit runs our economy. We have a debt-based currency. You look at margin debt's an all-time high. Basically, that's going to force sales of assets and collateral, and it's going to trigger a huge collapse in at least stocks. All these high-yield and junk bonds that pension companies have been chasing, they're not going to be able to pay back the investors, and this can be a big old default. All sucking sounds. Banks earn profits by borrowing short-term and lending long-term. So when the yields are inverted, banks don't want to lend at a loss, and they're not going to get the spread. So the consumer to retail to the wholesale chain, because of the debt credit that we need, is going to really be an economic headwind. Vince?
Rich, we're out of time. Ron, don't be a stranger. Please call back again and again and again. Thanks so much. Rich Scheben? Another 2 hours gone. Thank you.
Goes quick.
Class, above all, honesty and integrity. What happens next is up to you.